The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Koyalomi Township as 19-year-old Thando sat on the cracked concrete steps of her family home, her hands trembling as they rested on her small belly. 3 months pregnant, and her whole world was collapsing around her. Inside the house, voices rose and fell like angry waves crashing against rocks, each word a dagger to her heart. She has brought shame upon this house. Her father Samuel's voice thundered through the thin walls, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. What will people say? What will Pastor Sabia think when he finds out? We hold our heads high in this community, and now this disgrace. Thando's mother, Grace, tried to speak, her voice softer but no less cutting. Samuel, please lower your voice. The whole street can hear you. Let them hear. Samuel roared. Let them know that we did not raise our daughter to behave like a common street girl. We sent her to school. We gave her everything. And this is how she repays us. Through the window, Thando could see curtains twitching in neighboring houses. Mrs. Kumalo across the street stood openly in her doorway, arms crossed, watching the drama unfold with barely concealed satisfaction. Tomorrow, the whole township would know. The whispers would follow Thando everywhere. Grace's voice came again, measured and final. We cannot support this child and another mouth to feed. We barely manage as it is. She made her choice when she lay with that boy. David promised to marry me, Thando had said earlier, her voice breaking. He said he loved me. And where is David now? Samuel had shouted back. Gone to Johannesburg, that's where. Chasing dreams in the big city while you're left here with his bastard child. The door burst open now, and Thando's older brother Marcus emerged, his face a mask of controlled anger. At 23, Marcus had always been the golden child, the one with a steady job at the supermarket, the one who made the family proud. He dropped a small canvas bag at her feet, unable to meet her eyes. Father says you have until sunset, Marcus said, his voice tight. Take your things and go. Thando looked up at her brother, the person she'd grown up idolizing, who had taught her to ride a bicycle and helped her with homework. Marcus, please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I have nowhere to go. I don't have any money. David left for Johannesburg 2 weeks ago. He won't answer my calls or messages. I think he's blocked my number. Marcus finally looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, perhaps even regret, but it was quickly masked. You should have thought about that before you got yourself into this situation, Thando. I didn't plan this. Thando's voice rose, desperate. I thought he loved me. I thought we had a future. I was careful, but nothing, Marcus interrupted sharply. He glanced back at the house, then lowered his voice. Father has made his decision, and you know how he is. Nothing I say will change his mind. He's already been to the municipality this morning. He's removed your name from the family registry. As far as the official records show, you don't exist anymore. You were never born into this family. The words hit Thando like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Erased. Not just cast out or disowned, but completely erased from existence, as if she had never been born, never been loved, never been a daughter or a sister. It was a level of rejection she hadn't even imagined possible. How can he do that? She stammered. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He knows people at the office. He told them there was an error in the records, that you were listed twice or something. I don't know the details. But it's done, Thando. You need to accept that and move on. Move on. Thando's laugh was bitter and broken. Move on to where? I have 300 rand in my purse, Marcus. 300 rand and a baby coming in 6 months. Where am I supposed to go? For a moment, Marcus's facade cracked. His jaw clenched, and he looked away, blinking rapidly. There are shelters. Organizations that help girls in your situation. Girls in my situation, Thando repeated hollowly. You mean girls who've been thrown away by their families? Marcus flinched but said nothing. From inside the house, their father's voice boomed again. Marcus, is she still there? I told you sunset. Get her out of my sight. Marcus picked up the canvas bag and thrust it into Thando's hands. I put some of your clothes in there. Some toiletries. There's a little money too. 200 rand. It's all I have right now. I'm sorry, Thando. I really am. But you need to go. Thando stood on shaking legs, clutching the bag to her chest. She looked at the house she'd grown up in, the blue-painted walls now faded and peeling, the small garden where her mother grew tomatoes and spinach, the window of the bedroom she'd shared with her younger cousin before the cousin moved to Cape Town. This had been her whole world for 19 years. Tell Mama. Thando started, then stopped. What was there to say? Tell her I hope she can live with this decision. Marcus nodded, his face pained. As Thando turned to leave, he caught her arm. The market woman, Sarah. The one who sells vegetables near the taxi rank. I heard her telling someone that she had extra land by the informal settlement. She might be able to help you. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in days. Thando nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and walked away. She didn't look back, even when she heard her mother's voice calling from the doorway. Whether to call her back or to hurl more accusations, Thando would never know. The walk to the market took longer than usual. Thando's legs felt heavy, and she had to stop twice to sit on the curb when waves of nausea and dizziness overwhelmed her. The afternoon heat was oppressive, and her throat was parched. She used 20 rand to buy a bottle of water from a street vendor, watching her precious money dwindle with each transaction. At the market, she found Sarah closing up her vegetable stall. The older woman took one look at Thando's tear-stained face and red-rimmed eyes, and without a word, gathered her into a fierce hug. I heard what happened, Sarah said quietly. The whole township knows by now. Your father made sure of that. Thando's shoulders shook with silent sobs. I don't know what to do. I have nowhere to go. Sarah pulled back, her weathered hands cupping Thando's face. Listen to me, child. I have a small piece of land at the edge of the informal settlement. It's not much, just rocky ground that nobody wanted. But it's yours if you want it. We'll build you a shack. It won't be comfortable, but it will be shelter. Why? Thando whispered. Why would you help me? You barely know me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I had a daughter once. She was about your age when she got pregnant. Her father, my husband, he threw her out, just like yours did. I was too afraid to stand up to him, too afraid to choose my daughter over my marriage. She died in childbirth in a shack not far from where you'll be staying, alone except for a neighbor woman who tried to help. The baby died too. Her voice broke. I've regretted my cowardice every single day since. Maybe helping you is my way of making peace with her memory. Maybe it's my way of asking her forgiveness. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the township in shades of orange and purple, Thando stood at the edge of the informal settlement on the outskirts of Kyalami. The plot Sarah had given her was barely 4 meters square, a patch of rocky, uneven ground littered with refuse and weeds. Around her, the informal settlement stretched into the distance like a sea of corrugated iron and desperation. The sounds of the settlement washed over her, children playing and screaming, someone's radio blaring music, the clang of a hammer on metal as someone made repairs, a woman shouting at her husband, dogs barking. Cooking fires sent thin streams of smoke into the evening air, carrying the smell of grilling meat and boiling pap. This was a community of people who had been pushed to the margins, who survived through sheer determination and mutual support. I know it doesn't look like much, Sarah said gently, standing beside her. But I've lived here for 12 years now, ever since my husband died and I couldn't afford the rent in town. You learn to make it work. The people here, we help each other. You won't be alone. Sarah pulled a bundle from her shopping bag, a worn but clean blanket, a dented pot, a chipped plate, a plastic cup, and 3 candles. These will get you started. Tomorrow, I'll bring some wood and iron sheets. My son will help you build something proper. It won't be a palace, but it will keep the rain off your head." That night, huddled under the borrowed blanket on the hard, cold ground with only a plastic tarp stretched over 4 wooden poles for shelter, Thando placed her hand on her belly. She could feel the tiny life growing inside her, still so small, but undeniably present. Her child. Her responsibility. Her future. Around her, the settlement settled into its nighttime rhythm. A baby cried somewhere close by. A couple argued in hushed, angry voices. Someone played a guitar badly, but with enthusiasm. Life continued, messy and difficult and real. "I don't know how I'm going to do this, little one," Thando whispered into the darkness. "I don't know how I'm going to feed you or clothe you or give you any kind of decent life. I'm 19 years old, I have 500 rand to my name, no job, no family, and no plan. Everyone says I'm ruined. Everyone says my life is over before it really started." The baby fluttered inside her, just the faintest sensation, like butterfly wings against her palm. Thando closed her eyes, and suddenly she saw David's face, heard his promises, felt his touch. And then she saw her father's fury, heard her mother's silence, felt the door closing on her childhood home. The two images merged and twisted, becoming fuel for something hard and bright burning in her chest. "But I'll tell you what I do know," Thando continued, her voice growing stronger despite her tears. "I know that I will never, ever make you feel the way they made me feel today. I will never erase you or throw you away or make you think you're not worthy of love. And I will build something from this nothing. I don't know what yet, and I don't know how, but I will build something. Because one day, little one, they're all going to see what they threw away. They're going to see what greatness they rejected." She thought about her father's final words to her, shouted through the closed door as she walked away. "You will amount to nothing. Nothing." "We'll see about that," Thando whispered fiercely to the night sky, to her unborn child, to herself. "We'll see." The wind whistled through the settlement, carrying away her words but not her resolve. Somewhere in that darkness, on that patch of rocky ground at the edge of nowhere, a young woman's determination began to crystallize into something harder than diamond, forged in the fires of rejection and abandonment. She had been erased from the official records. Her family had declared her dead to them. But she was not dead. She was very much alive. And she would prove that being erased from one story didn't mean she couldn't write her own. Thando lay down on the hard ground, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. And she would face it. Because what other choice did she have? 6 months later, Thando's one-room shack had taken shape, though home still felt like too generous a word for it. The walls were a patchwork of donated materials. Corrugated iron sheets Sarah had helped her source from a demolished building, wooden pallets from behind the supermarket where Marcus worked, and blue plastic tarps that leaked when the rain came hard. The floor was packed earth, swept clean each morning but impossible to keep from turning to mud when it rained. A single door hung crookedly on improvised hinges, and one small window covered with plastic let in weak light. Her son, whom she'd named Daniel, lay sleeping in a cardboard box lined with the softest cloths she could afford. At 3 months old, he was small but healthy, with his father's eyes and her stubborn chin. Thando watched his tiny chest rise and fall with each breath, and she felt that familiar mixture of fierce love and desperate fear that had become her constant companion. The money she'd saved from her part-time job at a local cafe had run out 2 weeks after Daniel's birth. The cafe owner, Mrs. Dlamini, had been sympathetic but firm. "I can't keep you on, Thando. You need to be home with the baby. I understand, but I need someone reliable." So now Thando survived by washing clothes for other township residents, scrubbing collars and cuffs on a washboard outside her shack, her hands raw and cracked from the harsh soap. She earned maybe 50 rand a day when work was good, nothing when it wasn't. It was enough to buy May's meal and keep them both alive, but just barely. Daniel stirred and began to fuss. Thando lifted him from his makeshift crib, cradling him against her chest as she sat on the single plastic chair that constituted her furniture. As he nursed, she looked around the shack and felt the familiar wave of despair. This was not the life she'd imagined for herself. This was not the future she'd dreamed of when she'd been a schoolgirl with good grades and ambitions to become a teacher. Thando. Sarah's voice called from outside, and the older woman appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. I have news. There's a construction site up the road, you know, where they're building those new houses for the government workers. They're looking for someone to cook meals for the workers. It doesn't pay much, but it's something. Regular income. Thando's heart leaped. Regular income. The words sounded like a dream. How much? 50 rand a day, 6 days a week. You'd cook lunch for about 30 men. Pap, beans, maybe some meat when the budget allows. 50 rand a day, 6 days a week. That was 300 rand a week, 1,200 rand a month. It was more money than Thando had seen in months. But there was one problem. Sarah, I can't leave Daniel. He's too young, and I have no one to watch him. Sarah smiled knowingly. Take him with you. Strap him to your back like our mothers did. The workers won't mind a baby around. You're feeding them, not performing surgery. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Thando strapped Daniel to her back with a worn blanket tied securely across her chest. She walked to the construction site, her legs trembling not from the weight of her son but from fear. What if she failed? What if the foreman took one look at her, a teenage girl with a baby, and laughed in her face? The construction site was a hive of activity even at dawn. Men in work clothes moved between partially built structures, carrying timber and bags of cement. A cement mixer churned loudly. Hammers rang against nails. The foreman, a burly man named Joseph with arms like tree trunks and a face weathered by years in the sun, looked her up and down skeptically when she approached. You're too young, he said bluntly, not unkindly. And you've got a baby. How do you expect to cook for 30 hungry men every day while caring for an infant? Thando met his gaze steadily, though her heart hammered in her chest. I'll manage, sir. Give me 1 week to prove myself. If I can't do it, you don't have to pay me for that week. But if I can, then I get the job. Joseph studied her for a long moment, his eyes shrewd. 1 week, he finally said. But if you fall behind or the men complain about the food, you're out. No second chances. Understood. Be here tomorrow at 5 in the morning. You'll work until 2 in the afternoon. Bring your own knife and cutting board. Thando arrived at 4:30 the next morning, while stars still glittered in the pre-dawn darkness. Daniel was awake but quiet, his large eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. She'd borrowed a cutting board from Sarah and sharpened the one good knife she owned until it could slice paper. The construction company provided the ingredients: bags of maize meal, dried beans, onions, tomatoes, cooking oil, and occasionally some chicken pieces or beef bones for flavoring. Thando set to work with a determination that bordered on desperation. She built a fire, set massive pots of water to boil, and began preparing the food. With Daniel on her back, she chopped vegetables, stirred pots, adjusted the fire to maintain the right temperature, and tasted constantly to ensure the seasoning was right. The baby slept through most of it, lulled by the heat of the fire and the rhythm of his mother's movements. When the lunch break came, the workers lined up with their plates. Thando served them mountains of pap, rich bean gravy, and chocolate made with the vegetables and spices she'd been given. The men ate in appreciative silence, some coming back for seconds. Girl can cook, one of them said to Joseph, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. This is better than what we had before. But Thando did more than cook. As she worked, she watched and she learned. She observed how the construction crew worked, how they measured foundations with strings and levels, how they mixed concrete in precise ratios, how they solved problems when materials didn't arrive on time or when measurements didn't quite match the blueprints. During the lunch break, while the men rested in the shade and she cleaned the pots, she would ask questions. Why do you mix the concrete that way? She asked one of the builders, a middle-aged man named Peter who seemed more patient with her curiosity than the others. It's about the ratio, Peter explained, wiping sweat from his brow. Too much water and it's weak. Too little and it won't set properly. You need 3 parts sand, 2 parts cement, 1 part water. But you also need to feel it, know when the consistency is right. And the foundation. Why do you dig so deep? Building codes, Peter said. But also because if the foundation isn't deep and level, everything above it will eventually crack and fail. A building is only as good as its foundation. The workers, initially dismissive of the curious young woman with a baby on her back, began to warm to her. She worked harder than anyone they'd ever seen, arriving early and staying late to clean up. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, never made excuses. And her food was good, not fancy, but filling and flavored with care. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into her employment, Thando noticed the crew struggling to level a foundation on a particularly challenging piece of sloping ground. The senior builder was frustrated, and the workers were getting behind schedule. Thando hesitated, then spoke up. "What if you built a retaining wall first?" she suggested quietly, her voice barely carrying over the noise of the site. "My father used to work construction before I left home. I remember him doing something similar when the ground wasn't level. He'd build a wall on the lower side, fill behind it with compacted gravel, and then level from there." The site went quiet. The workers turned to look at her, this teenage girl with a baby, offering construction advice. For a moment, Thando thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then Peter, the older builder, nodded slowly. "That might actually work," he said thoughtfully. He turned to Joseph. "The girl has a good eye. It's not a bad idea." Joseph studied the slope, then looked at Thando with new interest. "Where did your father work?" "He was with Ndlovu Construction for 15 years, Thando said. "Until he hurt his back and had to stop. I used to visit him on sites sometimes when I was younger. I watched a lot." "And you remember it?" Joseph asked. "I remember everything," Thando said simply. They implemented her suggestion, and it worked. The foundation was completed on schedule, and Joseph pulled Thando aside at the end of the day. "You're more than just a cook," he said, eyeing her appraisingly. "You understand this work. That's rare." Over the following months, Thando became indispensable to the construction site in ways that went far beyond cooking. She kept the books, organizing receipts and tracking expenses with a meticulousness that made the company accountant's job easier. She organized supply deliveries, calling suppliers and negotiating prices with a confidence that surprised even herself. When workers called in sick, she would even help with basic construction tasks, mixing concrete, carrying materials, whatever was needed. Joseph began teaching her to read blueprints during slow afternoons, showing her how to interpret the lines and symbols, how to translate two-dimensional drawings into three-dimensional structures. Thando absorbed it all like a sponge, asking questions, taking notes on scraps of paper that she'd study by candlelight in her shack at night. But life remained brutally hard. Daniel grew, and so did their needs. He needed clothes, which Thando sewed from donated fabric. He needed food beyond breast milk, which meant buying baby cereal and mashed vegetables. There were nights when Thando went to bed hungry so her son could eat. There were mornings when she walked 2 hours to the construction site to save the 10 rand taxi fare. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to break her spirit entirely. One particularly difficult night, when Daniel had been crying for hours with what Thando suspected was an ear infection but couldn't afford to have treated by a doctor, she sat on the floor of her shack and wept. She was 21 years old, and she felt ancient. Her body ached from the physical labor. Her hands were calloused and scarred. Her dreams of becoming a teacher felt like they belonged to a different person entirely. But in the morning, she got up. She strapped Daniel to her back, grabbed her knife and cutting board, and walked to the construction site. Because what other choice did she have? Sarah noticed her exhaustion and pulled her aside one afternoon. "You can't keep doing this, child. You're going to break." "I don't have a choice," Thando said flatly. "You always have a choice. Maybe not a good one, but a choice." Sarah pressed a worn pamphlet into her hand. Night classes. Basic business management at the community center. It's free, sponsored by some NGO. You should go. How? Thando laughed bitterly. When would I have time? Who would watch Daniel? I will, Sarah said firmly. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening. Bring him to me. He can sleep in my shack while you learn something that might change your future. So Thando started attending classes. 2 nights a week, she would walk to the community center with her notebook and pen, joining a classroom of other desperate, hopeful people trying to better their circumstances. They learned about budgeting, about profit and loss, about basic accounting, about business registration and licensing. Thando excelled. The teacher, a retired businessman named Mr. McCona, was impressed by her questions, her understanding, her hunger to learn. You have a mind for this, he told her one evening. Don't waste it. She began saving every rand she could spare, cutting back on everything except the bare necessities for Daniel. She stopped buying sugar for her tea. She ate 1 meal a day instead of 2. She walked everywhere, no matter the distance. The money went into a tin buried beneath the dirt floor of her shack, hidden from thieves and her own moments of weakness. 2 years passed this way. Daniel grew into a bright-eyed, curious toddler who played in the dirt outside the shack while his mother worked. He learned to walk among the construction sites. His first words were hammer and mama. The workers became his extended family, slipping him sweets and teaching him to count using bolts and nails. And Thando learned. She learned construction, she learned business. She learned that survival required not just hard work but smart work. She learned to negotiate, to plan, to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. One evening, as she counted her savings by flickering candlelight, she had almost 5,000 rand now, saved over 2 years of brutal economy. Daniel stirred in his cardboard box, which he was rapidly outgrowing. Mama, he mumbled, reaching for her with chubby toddler hands. Thando pulled him close, pressing her lips to his forehead. He smelled like soap and sun and home. One day, baby, she whispered fiercely. One day we'll have a real house with real beds. One day you'll go to a good school with uniforms and books. One day everyone will see that we were never nothing. We were always something. We just had to build it ourselves, brick by brick. Daniel yawned and snuggled closer, already drifting back to sleep. But Thando stayed awake long into the night, her mind racing with possibilities. She was 21 years old now. She knew construction. She understood business basics. She had 5,000 rand. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough for a beginning. Wait, she's learning construction while raising a baby alone. This woman is unstoppable. If you're rooting for Thando, hit that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Inayah. Comment below. What would you do in Thando's situation? What's coming next shows her big break, and it changes everything. Don't miss it. 5 years had passed since Thando held baby Daniel on that construction site. Now a bright-eyed 5-year-old, Daniel attended a township preschool while Thando worked. She had moved from cooking to becoming Joseph's right hand at the construction company, managing projects and handling client relationships with a competence that surprised even seasoned professionals. But Thando wanted more. She had a vision that kept her awake at night. Her own business. Joseph, she said one afternoon as they reviewed blueprints for a new housing development, I want to start my own construction company. Small jobs at first. I've saved enough for basic equipment. Joseph leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're 24 years old, Thando. You have no formal qualifications, no family backing, no collateral for loans. The construction industry doesn't welcome people like us easily, especially not young women from the townships. I know, Thando said firmly, but I also know I'm better at estimating costs than any contractor you've worked with. I know how to manage workers. I know how to solve problems. And I know these townships better than any big company from the city. Joseph was silent for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. There's a small mining operation starting up about 50 kilometers from here. They need someone to build access roads and worker housing. It's not a big job, but it's a start. I could put in a word for you." Thando's heart raced. "You would do that for me?" "You've earned it," Joseph said simply. "But Thando, if you fail, you'll lose everything you've saved." "Are you sure?" That night, Thando stood outside her shack, still the same one-room structure, though she'd reinforced it over the years, and looked up at the stars. Daniel slept inside, his schoolbooks stacked neatly in the corner. "Mama always said I was reckless," she whispered to the night sky. Maybe she was right. But being careful didn't protect me. Being safe didn't save me. So I might as well be reckless and build something worth having. 3 weeks later, Thando registered her company, Phoenix Rising Construction. The name felt right, something born from ashes, rising against all odds. She hired 3 workers from the township, men who'd been struggling to find steady employment, and rented a small truck that broke down at least twice a week. With her savings and a small loan from a microfinance organization, she purchased basic tools and equipment. When she drove to her first job site with determination burning in her chest and fear churning in her stomach, she found the mining company's manager, a white man named Richard, waiting for her. He looked skeptical when she climbed out of the truck. "Joseph vouched for you," Richard said, looking her up and down. "But I'll be honest, I was expecting someone with more experience. Someone older. Someone who's not a young black woman from the townships." Thando finished for him, meeting his gaze steadily. Richard had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Thando pulled out her portfolio, sketches, cost estimates, timelines she'd prepared meticulously. "Give me this one job. Judge me by the results, not by what you think I should look like." Richard studied her portfolio, his expression shifting from skepticism to interest. "These estimates are very competitive. How can you do it at this price?" "Because I don't have the overhead costs of the big companies. Because I buy materials directly from suppliers who know me. Because my workers are invested in doing good work. It's their community we're building for. And because I'm hungry in a way that comfortable people never are." Richard laughed at that, a genuine sound. "All right, Thando. You've got your chance. Don't make me regret it." She didn't. Thando worked 20-hour days, driving home to see Daniel only twice a week, sleeping in her truck at the site the other nights. Her body ached constantly, but she pushed through. She negotiated with suppliers, demonstrating a knack for getting quality materials at prices that made Richard's accountant smile. When the first delivery of lumber arrived and half of it was substandard, she drove back to the supplier herself and refused to leave until they replaced it with proper materials. When heavy rains threatened to delay the project, washing out the beginnings of the access road, Thando worked through the night redesigning the drainage system. She studied the water flow patterns, consulted with her workers who knew the land, and implemented a solution that actually improved on the original design. Peter, who had left Joseph's company to work for her, watched her with admiration tinged with concern. "Boss, you need to sleep. You're going to make yourself sick." "I'll sleep when the job is done," Thando said, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "We cannot afford to fail. Not on our first contract." The access road was completed 2 weeks early and 15% under budget. The worker housing was solid, efficient, and exceeded safety standards. Richard walked through the completed project, shaking his head in amazement. "I've been in this industry for 20 years, he said. "I've never seen anything like this. The quality, the efficiency, the attention to detail, it's exceptional." He called her into his makeshift site office on the final day, and Thando's hands trembled slightly as she entered. Was he going to find fault? Refuse to pay? "Sit down, Thando," Richard said, gesturing to a chair. "We need to talk about the future." Thando sat, her back straight, her chin high. "The mining operation is expanding next year," Richard continued. "We're opening 2 more sites, and we'll need infrastructure for both. Access roads, worker housing, administration buildings, storage facilities. I've already spoken with my partners, and we all agree. We want Phoenix Rising Construction to handle all of it. He slid a document across the desk. We're talking about a 5 million rand contract over 18 months. Thando stared at the number. 5 million rand. More money than she'd ever imagined. More money than most people in Kyalami would see in their lifetimes. She started, her voice failing her. You've proven yourself, Richard said. You've proven that you can deliver quality work on time and under budget. That's rare in this industry. I'd be a fool not to work with you again. Thando's hands trembled as she shook his hand, sealing the deal. Thank you, Mr. Richard. You won't regret this. I know I won't, he said with a smile. You don't get second chances by being the kind of person who wastes first chances. That evening, Thando drove back to the township as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. She went straight to Sarah's house, where Daniel was staying. When he saw her, he ran to meet her on his little legs, and she swept him up in her arms, spinning him around. Mama, why are you crying? He asked, his small hands touching her tears with concern. These are happy tears, baby, she said, laughing through her sobs. Everything is about to change. Everything. That night, she sat with Daniel in her arms and told him the story of Phoenix Rising, the mythical bird that burned to ashes and rose again, more beautiful and powerful than before. That's us, she whispered to him. They tried to burn us down, to reduce us to nothing. But we're rising, baby. We're rising. 10 years had transformed Thando from a struggling single mother into one of the most successful businesswomen in the province. Phoenix Rising Construction had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, now operating under the full name Phoenix Rising Construction and Mining Solutions. The company employed over 200 people, operated a fleet of heavy machinery, and had contracts across 3 provinces. Thando's face had appeared in business magazines with headlines like, From Township to Titan, and The Woman Building South Africa's Future. But success had not softened her. She still remembered every hungry night, every moment of humiliation, every time someone told her she would amount to nothing. Those memories fueled her, drove her to work harder, to reach higher, to prove again and again that their judgment of her had been catastrophically wrong. Daniel, now 15, attended the best private school in the region. Tall and bright with his father's eyes and his mother's determination, he carried himself with quiet confidence. He knew his mother's story. She'd never hidden it from him, and it had shaped him into a young man who understood the value of hard work, dignity, and never judging people by their circumstances. They lived now in a modern house on the outskirts of the city, a world away from that one-room shack in the informal settlement. The house had 4 bedrooms, a study where Thando worked late into the night, a kitchen with appliances that would have seemed like science fiction to her younger self. But she'd kept one thing from the old days, the tin where she used to hide her savings. It sat on her desk now, holding pens and paper clips, a reminder of where she'd come from. Mom, Daniel said one evening as they sat in the living room, I saw an article about you in the business section. They called you the Township Titan. Thando smiled wryly, looking up from the proposal she was reviewing. They love a good story. Poor girl makes good. Rags to riches. It makes for compelling reading. Does it bother you? The way they talk about where you came from? Not anymore, Thando said honestly. I used to hate it, the way they'd focus on my past as if it were more interesting than my present. But I've learned to use it. When I walk into a boardroom now, they remember that I came from nothing. It makes them underestimate me. And then I surprise them. That's smart, Daniel said with a grin. Devious, but smart. I learned from the best, Thando said. Life teaches you to play the cards you're dealt, even if they're terrible cards. The following week, Thando received an unusual message. The mayor of Kyalami, a man named Dumasani, wanted to meet with her about a significant development project. She hadn't been back to the township in years. She'd avoided it deliberately, the memories too painful. But this was business, And Thando never let personal feelings interfere with business opportunities. She drove back to Koyalami on a Saturday morning, her luxury SUV drawing stares as it navigated the familiar streets. The township had grown, sprawling further into the surrounding land, but poverty still gripped it tightly. Children still played in streets with open sewers. Shacks still crowded together, vulnerable to fire and flood. The informal settlement where she'd once lived had doubled in size. Nothing had really changed. And seeing it with the eyes of someone who had escaped made Thando's chest tighten with a complicated mix of grief and anger. Mayor Dumasani greeted her warmly in his modest municipal office, his handshake firm and his smile genuine. "Ms. Thando, thank you for coming. Your success has made you very busy, I know." "I always have time for community development, Mr. Mayor," Thando said professionally. Good. Dumasani spread maps and documents across his desk. "The city has secured funding, provincial and national government grants, plus some private sector contributions, for a major township upgrade. We're talking about proper housing to replace the informal settlements, paved roads, a community center with a library and computer lab, a technical training school, upgraded water and sanitation infrastructure. It's a 50 million rand project over 3 years." Thando studied the documents, her trained eye immediately noting the scope and complexity. "It's ambitious. It's necessary," Dumasani said. "We want Phoenix Rising Construction to lead the project. We want you to come home and rebuild the place you came from." Thando looked up sharply. "Why me? There are bigger companies, more established firms that could handle this." Dumasani leaned back in his chair. "Because you're from here. Because you understand what these people need, not from reading reports but from having lived it. Because your reputation for quality work and fair treatment of workers is unmatched. And honestly, because having Thando return to rebuild Koyalami sends a powerful message about what's possible." Thando stood and walked to the window, looking out over the township. Somewhere in that maze of shacks was the plot where she'd raised Daniel, where she'd made her promise to build something from nothing. Somewhere out there, her family still lived. She'd heard through the grapevine that her father was ill, that Marcus had lost his job, that her mother had aged dramatically. "I'll do it," she said quietly, turning back to Dumasani. "But on conditions. 20% of the construction jobs must go to young single mothers from the township. We'll train them properly, pay them fair wages, and give them real skills. Additionally, I want to establish a scholarship fund for children from struggling families. Full tuition, books, uniforms, everything." "That's very generous," Dumasani said, clearly pleased. "It's not generosity," Thando corrected. "It's investment. Those young mothers? I was them. Those children. That was Daniel. I'm not being generous. I'm giving them what I had to fight for alone. A real chance." As Thando walked back to her car, she passed the street where her family's house still stood. It looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The blue paint had faded almost to grey. The garden where her mother grew vegetables was overgrown with weeds. A woman emerged from the house, her mother, Grace, now much older. Her hair was streaked with grey, her face lined with age and hardship. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Thando." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the distance. "Is it really you?" For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Grace took a step forward, then another, tears streaming down her face. "Thando, my baby. We heard stories, we saw articles, but we thought. We weren't sure." Thando's voice was steady, emotionless. "Hello, Mother. Thando, please." Grace was openly sobbing now, her hands reaching out. "We made a terrible mistake. Your father, he regrets everything. He's very ill now. He wants to see you, to apologize. Please, can we talk? Can you forgive us?" Thando looked at the woman who had given birth to her, who had raised her for 19 years, who had then stood by silently while her husband erased their daughter from existence. She felt, Nothing. No anger, no love, no hatred. Just a vast, empty distance, like looking at a stranger. I'm back to rebuild this township, Thando said quietly but firmly. Every shack, every road, every broken life that can be fixed or improved. But I'm not back for you. I'm not back for Father. I'm not back for Marcus. I'm back for all the other girls like me, the ones who need to know that being thrown away doesn't mean being worthless. Please, Grace begged, reaching for her daughter's arm. At least come see your father. He's dying. Thando. Let him make peace before he goes. Thando stepped back, avoiding her mother's touch. He had 16 years to make peace. He chose pride instead. That was his decision, and he'll have to live or die with it. She walked to her car without looking back, her spine straight, her head high. Behind her, she heard her mother's broken sobs, but she didn't turn around. She'd cried enough tears for that family. She had none left to spare. The township transformation project took 2 years of intensive work. Thando poured not just her company's resources into it, but her heart and soul. She hired 50 young single mothers from Kyalami, training them in construction skills, business management, and financial literacy. She built a state-of-the-art community center with a library stocked with thousands of books, a computer lab with high-speed internet, and a daycare facility where working mothers could leave their children in safety. She established the Phoenix Rising Scholarship Fund with an initial endowment of 2 million rand, providing full scholarships to 100 children from struggling families. She personally interviewed every applicant, looking for the hunger to learn, the determination to rise, the spark she recognized in herself. Daniel, now 17 and preparing for university, often worked alongside his mother during school holidays, helping to coordinate the youth programs and mentor younger children. He'd grown into a remarkable young man, compassionate, hard-working, aware of his privilege but not paralyzed by guilt about it. You know, he said one afternoon as they watched a new housing unit being completed, families waiting eagerly to move in. Everyone here talks about you like you're some kind of superhero. Thando laughed, wiping sweat from her forehead. I'm not a superhero, Daniel. I'm just someone who refused to stay down when the world pushed me. That's what makes you a superhero, Mom, Daniel said seriously. Not the powers, the refusal to quit. During those 2 years, Thando's family tried repeatedly to reach out. Grace came to the construction site multiple times, always turned away by security. Marcus sent messages through intermediaries, asking for just 5 minutes of her time. Even her father, Samuel, now frail and bedridden with cancer, sent word requesting to see his daughter one last time. Thando refused them all. She focused on the work, on the community, on building something that would outlast her. Until one day, Mayor Dumisani approached her with a special request. The community wants to honor you, he said, his expression serious. A dedication ceremony for the new community center. They want to name it after you, the Thando Daniel Hope Center. Daniel? Thando questioned, touched that they'd included her son. Because he represents hope too, Dumisani explained. He represents what's possible when a child is loved and supported despite difficult circumstances. Your family has also asked to attend. Your father is very ill, Thando. The doctors say he has weeks, maybe days. This might be his last chance. That night, Thando sat with Daniel on their balcony, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. What do you think I should do? She asked her son. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering carefully. Grandma Grace calls me sometimes. Did you know that? Thando looked at her son in surprise. What? Since when? About a year ago, she tracked down my cell number through the school somehow. She wants to know about me, about school, my friends, my plans. She sends birthday cards and Christmas messages. Uncle Marcus does too. You never told me, Thando said, feeling oddly betrayed. You never asked if I wanted to know them, Daniel said gently but firmly. Mom, I'm not saying you have to forgive them. What they did was terrible, and I understand why you're angry. But they're still my family too. My grandparents, my uncle. And I think Grandma really is sorry. I think they all are, in their own way. Sorry doesn't undo 16 years, Thando said bitterly. No, Daniel agreed. But holding on to anger doesn't undo them either. It just keeps you tied to the past. He looked at his mother with wisdom beyond his years. You've won, Mom. You've proven everything you set out to prove. You've built an empire, transformed a community, raised me to be a good person. They can't take any of that away. So maybe it's time to let them see what they lost. Not to forgive, but to release. The dedication ceremony was held on a brilliant Saturday morning. Hundreds of township residents gathered, along with business leaders, government officials, and journalists. The new community center gleamed in the sunlight, its walls painted in bright colors, solar panels on the roof, a playground already full of laughing children. It was more than a building. It was a symbol of hope, transformation, and possibility. Thando stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. In the front row sat Sarah, who had given her that first plot of land and who now worked as the community center's coordinator. Beside her were the 50 single mothers who now had careers and hope, their children playing nearby. Joseph was there, beaming with pride at his former protégé. Peter and the other workers from those early days had come, dressed in their Sunday best. And off to the side, looking small and aged and uncertain, sat her family. Grace, Marcus, and Samuel in a wheelchair, his once powerful frame wasted by illness. 16 years ago, Thando began, her voice strong and clear, amplified across the crowd. I stood in this township with nothing. No home, no money, no support. I was 19 years old, pregnant, and erased from my own family's records. Some of you remember. Some of you whispered about me. Some of you turned away. The crowd was silent, many faces showing shame. But some of you helped, Thando continued, her voice softening. Sarah gave me land when I had nowhere to sleep. Joseph gave me a job when no one else would. Peter taught me when I knew nothing. Strangers showed me more kindness than my own blood. And I learned something important. Family isn't just about who shares your DNA. Family is about who shows up when you need them. She looked directly at her parents, her gaze unflinching. Today, I stand here not because I had support from those who should have loved me unconditionally, but because I refused to let their rejection define me. I built this empire from nothing because I had no choice. And now I'm using it to make sure no other girl has to face what I faced alone. Grace was crying openly, her shoulders shaking. Samuel's head was bowed, tears dripping onto his thin hands. Marcus stared at the ground, unable to meet his sister's eyes. But, Thando continued, her voice softening slightly, I also learned that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. I don't forget what happened. I can't forget. But I also won't let bitterness corrupt the good life I've built. I won't let your choices continue to have power over me. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed to tour the facility and enjoy the celebration, Thando approached her family. Daniel walked beside her, a silent support and a bridge between generations. This is your grandson, Daniel, she said quietly, formally. He's brilliant, kind, and strong. Everything I hoped he would be. Samuel looked up, his eyes red and sunken but still carrying that familiar intensity. When he spoke, his voice was a whisper, a shadow of the booming voice that had once thrown her out. Thando, I was wrong. So very wrong. I threw away my daughter because of pride and fear of what people would say. I've regretted it every single day since. I've had 16 years to think about my mistakes, lying in bed, knowing I'm dying, knowing I destroyed my family for nothing. I know, Thando said simply. Daniel told me you've been reaching out to him, that you try to be part of his life. I wanted to know my grandson, Grace whispered, her voice breaking. Even if you wouldn't let me know you. I wanted to tell him stories about you as a child. How smart you were, how determined, how you used to dance in the rain. I wanted him to know his mother has always been special. Thando felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but shifting, like ice beginning to thaw. Why now? Why try to know him but not fight for me 16 years ago? Because I was a coward, Grace said, the words torn from her. Because I chose my husband over my daughter, and by the time I found the courage to choose differently, I thought it was too late. I thought you'd hate me forever, and maybe you should. But I couldn't let another generation grow up without family. I couldn't let Daniel never know where he came from. Marcus stepped forward hesitantly. Thando, I'm proud of you. I always was, even when I was too cowardly to say it. When I dropped that bag at your feet 16 years ago, I died a little inside. I've been dying inside ever since, knowing I failed you when you needed me most. Thando looked at her brother, the man who had once been her hero, who had taught her to ride a bicycle and protected her from bullies, who had then thrown her out with nothing. Then be better now, she said, her voice steady but not unkind. Don't just be proud from a distance. Don't just feel guilty. Be present. Be useful. Help me lift up others the way you should have lifted me. I will, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Tell me what you need, and I'll do it. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I did. Thando turned back to her parents. I will never forget what you did. How you erased me, abandoned me when I needed you most. That pain shaped who I am. It made me stronger, but it also left scars that will never fully heal. I can't pretend those 16 years didn't happen. We don't ask you to forget, Samuel said, his voice barely audible. We just want you to know we're sorry. We want to know our grandson. We want to be part of your lives, even just a small part, if you'll allow it. Thando was silent for a long moment, feeling Daniel's hand slip into hers, grounding her. She looked at her parents, old, broken, facing death and regret. And she realized something. They had already paid a price for their choices. They had lived 16 years knowing what they'd thrown away, watching from a distance as she succeeded beyond anything they'd imagined possible. They had lost the joy of knowing their grandson's first steps, his first words, all his childhood milestones. They had made themselves poor while trying to maintain their pride. My son deserves to know his grandparents, if he chooses, Thando said finally. I won't deny him that. But understand this, I didn't come back here for you. I came back for every abandoned girl, every struggling mother, every person told they were nothing. You don't get credit for my success. You get the lesson of knowing what you threw away. Samuel nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. That's more than we deserve. Thank you, Thando. Thank you. As the sun set over Koyalomi Township that evening, Thando stood with Daniel at the entrance of the Thando Daniel Hope Center, watching children play on the new playground, mothers attending skills training classes, families moving into solid homes with running water and electricity. The informal settlement where she'd once lived was being systematically replaced with proper housing, one family at a time. Did you forgive them? Daniel asked softly as they watched the activity. Thando considered the question carefully, honestly. I don't know if I've forgiven them, she admitted. Forgiveness feels like it would erase what happened, and I don't want to erase it. That pain, that struggle, it made me who I am. It taught me things about strength and resilience that I never would have learned otherwise. Then what did you do? Daniel asked. I released them, Thando said thoughtfully. I let go of the power they had over me. They erased me once, but I wrote myself back into existence. Bigger, stronger, and better than they ever imagined. I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need their validation. I have proof that I was right and they were wrong. She looked at her son. That's not forgiveness. That's freedom. She put her arm around Daniel, pulling him close. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being free is more important than being forgiving. In the distance, Grace and Samuel sat on a bench outside the Hope Center, Marcus standing nearby. They watched their daughter from afar, the daughter they'd thrown away, who had become the savior of the very community they still lived in, who had built an empire from the ashes of their rejection. The irony was not lost on anyone. Greatness had been born in their neglect. And now that greatness would reshape the township, one solid foundation at a time, ensuring that no one else would be erased for the crime of being human, for making mistakes, for needing support when life knocked them down. That evening, as Daniel went inside to help coordinate the youth programs, Thando stood alone for a moment, looking up at the sign above the entrance. Thando Daniel Hope Center, where every story can begin again. She thought about that scared 19-year-old girl, sitting on cracked concrete steps, believing her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming. Not the easy parts, because there wouldn't be many of those, but the strong parts. The moments when she'd discover she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. "We made it," Thando whispered to her younger self, to all the young women who would walk through these doors in years to come. "We made it." And in that moment, standing in front of the building that bore her name, surrounded by the community she'd helped transform, with a son inside making the world better just by being himself, Thando finally felt something she hadn't felt in 16 years. She felt whole. Wow. She gave them a second chance, but on her terms. This is what real strength looks like. If this story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Inayah. Comment below. Did Thando make the right choice? What would you have done? Share this powerful story with everyone who needs to hear it. Turn on notifications for more incredible stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and remember, you're never nothing just because someone treats you that way. You're everything waiting to be built.